It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from a late shift at work. As she drove down the deserted road, the rain came down in sheets and the wind howled around her car. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched to the bone and shivering in the cold. Sarah pulled over to offer her a ride. The woman climbed into the car, thanking Sarah for her kindness. As they drove on, Sarah tried to make small talk, but the woman remained silent, staring straight ahead. As they passed by an old cemetery, the woman suddenly turned to Sarah and said, "Stop the car." Sarah was taken aback by the woman's sudden outburst, but she obliged and pulled over. The woman got out of the car and walked towards the cemetery gates. Sarah watched as the woman disappeared into the darkness. She waited for what felt like an eternity, but the woman never came back. Suddenly, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She looked in her rearview mirror and saw the woman sitting in the back seat, her eyes glowing with an eerie green light. Sarah screamed and slammed on the gas, but the car wouldn't move. The woman began to laugh, a chilling sound that echoed around the car. Suddenly, the car lurched forward and Sarah found herself hurtling towards the cemetery gates. She closed her eyes and braced for impact, but when she opened them again, she was driving down a different road, miles away from the cemetery. Shaken and terrified, Sarah drove home, vowing never to pick up a hitchhiker again. But from that day on, she could always feel the woman's presence in her car, a ghostly reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. Samantha had always been fascinated by the abandoned house at the end of her street. It was a tall, imposing structure with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. Rumors had circulated for years about the strange family that had once lived there, and the terrible fate that had befallen them. One night, Samantha decided to investigate. She crept up to the house and peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. To her surprise, she saw a flicker of light inside the house. Heart pounding, Samantha pushed open the door and stepped inside. The light came from an old oil lamp sitting on a table in the center of the room. As she moved further into the house, Samantha noticed something strange. The air was thick with dust, but there were no footprints in it. Suddenly, Samantha felt a cold breeze rush past her, and the oil lamp flickered and died. She tried to relight it, but the matches wouldn't catch. Then, she heard a faint whisper coming from upstairs. She climbed the creaking staircase and found herself in a dimly lit hallway. The whispering grew louder and more urgent, and Samantha realized it was coming from behind a closed door. With trembling hands, Samantha pushed the door open. The room was empty except for a small box on the floor. She bent down to pick it up, but as soon as she touched it, the door slammed shut behind her. Samantha was trapped. She pounded on the door and screamed for help, but no one came. Hours passed, and Samantha began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. She knew she wasn't alone in the room. Suddenly, the box opened by itself, and a ghostly figure appeared before her. Samantha tried to run, but she was frozen in place. The ghostly figure moved closer and closer until it was right in front of her. It spoke in a whisper, "You should never have come here." Samantha tried to scream, but no sound came out. The next morning, Samantha was found unconscious on the porch of the abandoned house. She never spoke of her experience again, but she knew that the ghostly figure had warned her of the dangers of meddling in things that were better left alone. Emily had always loved spending time in her grandmother's old house. It was a cozy little cottage in the woods, filled with old family photos and treasures from days gone by. One night, Emily was staying over at her grandmother's house when she woke up to use the bathroom. As she walked down the dark hallway, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. When she looked up, she saw a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was a tall, thin man with a pale face and dark, sunken eyes. Emily froze, too scared to move. The man began to move towards her, and Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as the man was about to reach her, Emily woke up in her bed, drenched in sweat. She told her grandmother about the dream the next morning, but her grandmother's face turned pale. "That wasn't a dream," she said. "That was the ghost that haunts this house." Emily was shocked. She had never believed in ghosts before, but the look on her grandmother's face convinced her otherwise. Over the next few nights, Emily began to see the ghostly figure more and more often. It would appear at the end of the hall, watching her with its dark, lifeless eyes. One night, Emily decided she had had enough. She walked down the hall, determined to face the ghost head-on. But as she got closer, she realized that the figure wasn't a ghost at all. It was a real, living person. The man turned and looked at her with a sneer. "You should have stayed in bed," he said, before disappearing into the shadows. Emily never forgot that night. She knew that the man had been after something, and that she had narrowly escaped with her life. From that day on, she never stayed in her grandmother's house alone again.